A veteran destroyed a giant termite mound on her farm. What her dog found hidden beneath it had been buried for 60 years. The retired sergeant is standing in a forensic lab, and she cannot stop her hand from shaking. Not the left one. That hand hasn't moved since the stroke took it from her. The right one. The only one she has left. It's trembling over a dirt-caked leather satchel that a dog pulled from the earth 3 days ago. The dog is beside her now. A Belgian Malinois, lean, intense, vibrating with a focus so absolute that 3 technicians have stopped working just to watch him. He's locked in a detection sit nose, aimed at the satchel, body rigid, eyes unblinking. He has held this posture for almost an hour. Every handler this dog ever had gave up on him. He was washed out of the military, labeled defective, too stubborn, too obsessive. A dog that wouldn't stop alerting on things nobody wanted found. She knows that feeling. The technician opens the satchel carefully. Old paper, old photographs, a handwritten letter dated 1963. She reads it once, reads it again. Then she sets it down gently, the way you set down something that can break a life, and looks at the veteran across the table. "Ma'am, are you sure you want to know what this is?" The veteran looks down at the dog. The dog looks up at her. And in that look is the only truth she has left. The truth of a creature who never once stopped searching, even when the whole world told him he was wrong. "He's sure," she says quietly. "So, I'm sure." What that satchel contained would shatter a 60-year silence. It would turn the woman's father a war hero, a community legend, the man she joined the army to honor, into someone she no longer recognized. It would cost her the only sacred ground she had left, and the only reason any of it came to light was a dog that everyone called broken, a dog that loved her enough to show her a truth that would break her heart. Stay with us, because this story will move you to tears before it's over. Before we start, hit like and subscribe. Where are you watching from? Drop your country in the comments. But to understand how this moment came to be, we need to go back 3 weeks to a crumbling farmstead in rural Georgia, where a woman with one working hand and nothing left to lose met a dog with everything to prove. 3 weeks earlier, a rusted pickup truck turned off the county road and onto a dirt lane that hadn't been graded in over a year. Weeds scraped the undercarriage. A low branch clawed the windshield. Behind the wheel, Elaine Mwangi leaned forward and squinted through the dust. The farmstead sat at the end of the lane, like something the land was trying to swallow. Kudzu had taken the fence posts. The porch sagged on the left side where a support beam had rotted through. 18 months of Georgia rain and neglect had turned her father's property into something she barely recognized. She parked and sat for a long time with the engine off. The air outside was warm and thick. Late September, but summer hadn't let go yet. Cicadas screamed from the tree line. The smell hit her when she opened the door: red clay, wet wood, and the faint sweetness of decay that old houses give off when no one has opened a window in too long. Elaine stepped down from the cab carefully, leading with her left leg. Her right arm hung at her side, the fingers curled inward, the wrist locked at an angle that hadn't changed since the stroke 7 months ago. She had learned to do most things with her left hand. Buttons were still a problem. Jar lids were impossible. She pulled the first box from the truck bed using one arm and her hip. The box was labeled in her own handwriting, neat block letters, black marker, military habit, kitchen. She carried it to the porch, climbed the 3 steps by gripping the railing and pulling, and nudged the front door open with her shoulder. The house smelled like her father. Old coffee. Boot polish. The ghost of pipe tobacco that had seeped into the walls over 40 years. She set the box on the kitchen counter and stood still, breathing it in. Joseph Mwangi's life was everywhere. A framed honorable discharge on the hallway wall, a Korean War Service medal in a shadow box above the television, photographs on every surface. Joseph in uniform, Joseph shaking hands with the county commissioner, Joseph standing in front of this very house the day he bought it in 1963. The first black man to own land in Decatur County. The plaque at the VFW Hall said so. Elaine touched the largest photograph. Her father in his dress uniform, young and sharp-jawed, looking directly into the camera with the kind of steady confidence she had spent her entire life trying to earn. She had joined the army because of this man. Military police, 26 years, 3 overseas postings, a career built on the belief that justice was not a word but a practice. She had believed that because he taught her to believe it. The career cost her a marriage. It cost her Nadia and David too, or that was what they told her. That she chose the uniform over bedtime stories, that she was never there. Nadia was a journalist in Atlanta now and hadn't returned a call in 3 years. David sent a card at Christmas, no return address. The stroke had ended all of it. One morning at Fort Hood, she dropped her coffee mug and couldn't pick it up. 30 minutes later, the right side of her body belonged to someone else. Medical retirement came fast. The Army moved on. Elaine had nowhere to go except the only ground that still meant something. She spent the rest of the afternoon hauling boxes one-handed. By evening, her left shoulder burned and her back ached in a way that reminded her she was 62, not 32. She sat on the porch with a glass of water and watched the sun drop behind the tree line. That was when she noticed it clearly for the first time. Behind the grain silo, rising from the red earth like a crooked cathedral, stood the Termite Mound. Locals called it the column. It was nearly 10 feet tall, built from decades of layered clay hardened to something close to concrete. It had been there as long as Elaine could remember, a strange, ugly monument that her father had never touched, never even mentioned. Now she could see the problem. The base of the mound had spread over the years, pressing into the silo's foundation. A long crack ran up the concrete wall. If she wanted to use the silo, if she wanted to build the raised garden beds she had planned, something she could tend one-handed, something that would give her days a shape, the column had to come down. She pulled out her phone and called the demolition company in Bainbridge. They could come Tuesday. She was about to go inside when the phone buzzed again. The screen showed a name she hadn't seen in months, Dale Worthy, a retired sergeant she had served with at Fort Campbell. "Elaine, I need a favor," he said. "There's a dog, Belgian Malinois, 4 years old, incredible nose. The DOD just washed him out of their detection program. Dale, I can barely take care of myself." "I know, but this dog, they're going to put him down if nobody takes him. He's not dangerous. He's just stubborn. He won't stop working, even when they tell him to stop." Dale paused. "Reminds me of someone, actually." Elaine closed her eyes. The cicadas pulsed in the dark. The column stood against the last light like a shadow with no source. "How soon?" she said. 2 days later, a white government van pulled up the dirt lane and parked beside Elaine's truck. The woman who stepped out wore a VA polo shirt and a tired expression. She walked around to the rear doors and opened them, and the dog inside hit the ground before she could reach for the leash. He was lean, not thin, built like a drawn bow. Every muscle visible beneath a short fawn coat darkened to black across the muzzle and ears. His eyes swept the yard in a single pass fence line, tree line, silo, house, and his nostrils flared wide, pulling in the property like he was reading a map no one else could see. "This is Kip," the handler said. 4 years old. Belgian Malinois. Elaine stood on the porch and watched the dog inventory her entire farm in under 10 seconds. "He's got the best nose in the program, scored higher on detection trials than dogs with twice his experience." The handler clipped a lead to Kip's collar, but the dog didn't seem to notice it. He was already pulling toward the grain silo, ears pinned forward, weight low. "The problem isn't what he finds, it's that he won't stop finding things." "What does that mean?" Elaine said. "Compulsive, independent alerting. He signals on targets the handler hasn't authorized. Old buried pipes, chemical traces from 20 years ago, things nobody asked him to look for." The handler shrugged. "And once he locks on, he won't release. You have to physically move him. The DoD calls it a reliability issue. They washed him out 3 weeks ago." Kip had already turned away from the silo and was sniffing the base of the porch steps. His breathing was fast, rhythmic, mechanical short bursts through the nose, each one pulling a different layer of scent from the wood. "I'm 62 with one working arm," Elaine said. "I can't physically move a dog like that. He's not aggressive, he's just intense." The handler paused. "And the alternative is euthanasia." Nobody else called back. A mockingbird sang from the fence post. The afternoon heat pressed down on the yard like a hand. Elaine looked at the dog. The dog did not look at her. He was smelling the gap between the second and third porch boards with the focus of a surgeon reading a scan. "Temporary," Elaine said. 2 weeks. The first 2 days were exhausting. Kip did not rest. He paced the house at night, nails clicking on the hardwood in loops that Elaine could track from her bed kitchen to hallway to front door to kitchen again. During the day, he patrolled the property in wide circuits, nose grazing the ground, tail level, ears rotating like small radar dishes. He ate his food in 4 bites and went back to searching. Elaine couldn't walk him properly. Her right hand couldn't grip the leash, and her left wasn't strong enough to hold him if he lunged. So she let him range the fenced yard and watched from the porch. He never tried to leave. He never barked. He just worked endlessly, silently, mapping every inch of the farm with a focus that made Elaine's chest tight. She recognized it. That need to be doing something, that inability to shut off. On Tuesday morning, the demolition crew from Bainbridge arrived, 2 men, a flatbed, and a rented backhoe. Elaine had locked Kip inside the house before they came. Through the kitchen window, she could see the column, the massive termite mound behind the silo, 10 feet of hardened clay baked by decades of Georgia sun. The backhoe bit into the base. The column held for a moment, then split with a sound like a rifle crack. The top half collapsed in a cascade of red-brown debris, chunks of clay scattering across the field. Dust rose in a thick plume. The crew foreman whistled. Then the screen door exploded off its hinges. Kip crossed the yard in 3 seconds. He hit the debris pile at full speed, circled it once, and dropped into a sit so rigid he looked bolted to the ground. Ears locked forward, nose aimed at a single point in the rubble, tail flat. Every muscle drawn tight, he did not blink. The foreman took 2 steps back. "That's a detection posture," he said. "I did 2 tours in Afghanistan. That dog is signaling live ordnance." He called the sheriff. A deputy arrived 20 minutes later with a handheld scanner. He swept the debris pile, twice, nothing. No metal, no chemical signature. No explosive residue. "Dog's got a screw loose," the deputy said. "That's why they kicked him out, right?" Elaine didn't answer. She was watching Kip. He hadn't moved, not a centimeter. His shoulders trembled with a low vibration she could see from 15 feet away, and a thin whine leaked from his throat, not distress, not pain, but something closer to insistence. The crew packed up. The deputy left. The afternoon light stretched long and golden across the ruined mound. Kip stayed. An hour passed. Elaine brought him water. He didn't drink. She tried to pull his collar. He didn't budge. She sat in the dirt beside him, her bad hand resting in her lap, and watched his nose. It was aimed at the same spot. It had not wavered once. She reached into the rubble with her left hand and began to scrape. Clay and dirt packed under her fingernails. She pulled away chunks of hardened earth the termites had cemented over decades. 6 inches down, her fingers touched something smooth. Leather. She pulled it free. A cylinder, rolled tight, caked in red dirt. She brushed it off and unrolled it carefully. Inside was a single sheet of paper, brittle at the edges, folded twice. A letter, dated November 14, 1963. The handwriting stopped her breath. She had seen it on birthday cards, on the backs of photographs, on the inscription inside her first Bible. Neat, slanted, deliberate, her father's hand. The letter was addressed to a name she had never heard in her life. Not once, not in any story, not in any of the dozens of framed photographs lining the walls of the house behind her. It was addressed to a man named Henry Lyle Cotter, and the first line read, "This will be settled quietly, and no one need ever know." Elaine sat at the kitchen table that night with the letter spread flat under the overhead light. She read it 4 times. The paper was brittle, and the ink had faded to a pale brown, but the words were clear enough. The letter referenced a land transaction. It mentioned a promise made and a debt settled. It used the phrase, "This will be settled quietly, and no one need ever know." And it was addressed to a man named Henry Lyle Cotter. Elaine had grown up in this house. She had spent 18 years listening to her father's stories. Korea, the farm, the early days when he was the only black landowner in the county, and every fence post felt like a flag planted in hostile ground. He talked about neighbors, rivals, fellow veterans, church members. He never once mentioned anyone named Henry Lyle Cotter. She searched the house. Every drawer, every closet, every box she had unpacked since arriving. She went through the filing cabinet in the hallway where her father kept 40 years of tax returns in neat manila folders. Nothing. No second letter. No photograph. No document with that name. Kip followed her from room to room. nose low, tail level, tracking her movement with the patient focus of a dog that understood searching even if he didn't understand what she was looking for. The next morning, she drove into town. The county records office sat on the second floor of the courthouse in Bainbridge, a room with fluorescent lights, metal shelving, and the stale smell of old paper and dust. The clerk was a young man with a pen behind his ear who seemed surprised anyone wanted to look at property records from the 1950s. He found the file in 20 minutes. The property, Elaine's property, her father's property, had been originally deeded to Henry Lyle Cotter in 1958. Cotter was listed as a white male, occupation sharecropper, no spouse on record at time of filing. In 1963, the deed transferred to Joseph Mwangi. The transfer document listed no sale price. The line was simply blank. Cotter's forwarding status read, "Departed forwarding address unknown." "That's unusual," the clerk said, frowning at the screen. "No sale price, no forwarding, usually means the original owner left town before the paperwork was finalized." Elaine stared at the blank line where a number should have been. A man doesn't sell his land for nothing, and a man doesn't disappear without telling someone where he went. She thanked the clerk and drove to the VFW hall. The building was a low cinder block rectangle at the edge of town, painted white, with an American flag hanging limp in the warm air. Inside, the walls were lined with photographs and plaques. Her father's bronze plaque hung near the entrance, Corporal Joseph Mwangi, Korean War veteran, first black landowner in Decatur County. Beside it, a framed photograph of Joseph shaking hands with the county commissioner in 1975. A man was straightening chairs near the back of the room. He turned when Elaine entered, and his face opened into a wide, immediate smile. "You must be Elaine." He crossed the room with his hand extended. "Raymond Osei. I delivered your father's eulogy. I've been hoping you'd come by." He was 70, tall, with close-cropped gray hair and the kind of voice that filled a room without effort. A pastor's voice, built for comfort and authority in equal measure. He wore a pressed shirt and a gold cross at his collar. His handshake was firm and warm. "Your father was my mentor," Raymond said. "Everything I know about service, about community, I learned from Joseph. This hall wouldn't exist without him." They talked for 10 minutes. Raymond asked about her health, her plans for the farm, whether she needed anything. His warmth was genuine and practiced the ease of a man who had spent decades caring for people professionally. Then Elaine mentioned the land records. She mentioned the blank sale price. She mentioned Henry Lyle Cotter. The warmth didn't vanish, but something behind it shifted. A flicker in his eyes, fast as a blink. His smile held, but the muscles around it tightened by a fraction, the smallest recalibration, the kind only someone trained in reading people would catch. Elaine had spent 26 years in military police. She caught it. "Cotter," Raymond said, nodding slowly. "Sure, I've heard the name. He was a drifter, I believe. Worked the land for a few years, sold it to your father, and moved on. That was before my time, of course, but the old-timers used to mention him. Nothing remarkable about the man, from what I understand. The records don't show a sale price. Well, it was 1963. Record-keeping wasn't what it is now." Raymond smiled again. "I wouldn't read too much into old paperwork, Elaine. Your father earned that land. Everyone in this county knows that." He walked her to the door and told her to call any time. His hand rested briefly on her shoulder. His smile never wavered. Elaine drove home with the windows down and the warm air pulling at her collar. She replayed the conversation twice in her head. The words were right. The tone was right. But the flicker was wrong. She had seen that exact micro-expression 1,000 times in interrogation rooms. The involuntary flash of a person who has just been asked about something they hoped would never come up. She pulled up the dirt lane and parked. The evening light was amber and long across the yard. Kip was in the debris field behind a silo. She could see him from the truck head down, front paws working at a spot 6 feet from where he had found the letter. She walked over. He didn't look up. His breathing was the same rapid, mechanical pattern he used when he was locked onto a scent. His claws scraped at the hardened clay, sending small red chips flying behind him. By the time she reached him, he had pulled something free. He held it in his mouth, delicate, careful, the way he carried everything, and set it on the ground at her feet. A small metal cylinder, rusted, almost black, roughly the length of her thumb. Elaine crouched and picked it up. She turned it in the fading light. She didn't need a lab to identify it. She had handled thousands of these in her career. It was a spent shell casing, A-38 caliber, military issue. The same kind the Army had issued to every enlisted man who served in Korea. The county coroner's office sat in a low brick building on the edge of Bainbridge, sandwiched between a feed store and a tax preparer. The waiting room smelled like floor wax and old magazines. Elaine sat in a plastic chair with the letter in a Ziploc bag on her lap and the spent casing in a second bag beside it. Her left hand rested on top of both. Her right hand rested on nothing, curled and still. Dr. Anine came out to meet her personally. She was a small woman in her 50s with reading glasses pushed up on her forehead and a direct way of speaking that Elaine recognized the tone of someone who dealt in facts because facts were easier than feelings. Elaine laid the bags on the desk and explained, the Termite Mound, the demolition, the Dawn's alert, the letter dated 1963. The casing she had found the day before, a rusted .38 military issue, buried in the same debris. I need to know if there's more in that mound, Elaine said. I need to know if there are human remains. Anine studied the casing through the plastic for a long moment. Then she picked up her phone and called her field team. I can have someone out there tomorrow morning, she said. But I want you to understand, if we find something, this becomes a formal investigation. County sheriff, state bureau, the whole chain. You sure you want to open that door? The dog already opened it, Elaine said. The team arrived the next day, 2 technicians in county vehicles carrying sifting screens and sample bags. They set up a grid over the debris field where the column had stood. Kip watched from the porch, ears tracking their movements, nose twitching at the chemicals on their gloves. By noon, the news had traveled through every church pew and diner booth in Decatur County. Raymond Osei arrived at the farm that evening. He came in his own truck, not the church van. He brought a casserole dish covered in foil and a gallon of sweet tea. His smile was wide and warm when Elaine opened the door, the smile of a man who had spent 50 years making people feel cared for. I heard you've had some excitement out here, he said. He set the food on the kitchen counter and looked around the house with the easy familiarity of someone who had been there 100 times before. Your father would be glad you're home, Elaine. He talked about you more than you probably know. Elaine leaned against the counter. Kip was at her feet, lying down but not relaxed, head up, eyes fixed on Raymond, nostrils working. I want to make sure you're taking care of yourself, Raymond said. His voice dropped half a register, the way a pastor's does when the conversation shifts from greeting to concern. Dale Worthy told me about the stroke, and I know being out here alone, with everything your father left behind, grief can do things to us. It can make us see patterns that aren't there. I'm not seeing patterns, Raymond. I'm reading a letter. Of course. He nodded slowly. I just worry. I spoke with David last week, actually. He called the church looking for information about the property. He's worried too. Elaine's left hand tightened on the counter edge. David had called Raymond, not her. Her own son had reached out to a stranger in her father's church before reaching out to her. Raymond watched her face and seemed to register the hit. He softened his voice further. All I'm saying is you've been through a tremendous amount. The body, the mind, they need rest. And stirring up old dirt, literally and otherwise, that's not rest. He paused. Your father built something beautiful here. For this community. I'd hate to see that legacy get muddied by a dog that the military itself said can't be trusted. He left the casserole. He left the tea. He left a card with his personal phone number written on the back. Kip growled once after the truck pulled away, low, brief, from deep in his chest. Then he stood and walked to the back door and pressed his nose against the screen. Over the next 2 days, the shifts came quietly. A neighbor who had waved from her mailbox every morning stopped waving. The woman at the hardware store was polite but brief, her eyes sliding away when Elaine mentioned the farm. At the post office, Elaine overheard 2 men talking. Stroke took more than her arm, from what I hear. Raymond says she's digging up the yard like it's a crime scene. Got some reject police dog doing tricks in the dirt. Elaine left without her mail. That afternoon, the coroner's team called a break and packed their screens. The lead technician found Elaine on the porch and asked to speak privately. They had recovered fragments from the northwest quadrant of the grid, small, chalky, partially damaged. He couldn't say for certain yet, but preliminary analysis suggested bone. Human bone. The air was thick and hot. Somewhere behind the silo, a crow called 3 times and went quiet. Kip had left the porch an hour earlier. Elaine found him near the old fence line, 30 yards from the mound debris, digging at the base of a rotted post with both front paws. His ears were flat, his breathing fast, and when Elaine approached, he did not look up. He just kept digging. She waited. The sun dropped low. Kip pulled something from the soil and carried it to her feet, a small, dark shape. She crouched and picked it up with her left hand, a bone fragment, pale, jagged, smaller than her thumb, pressed into clay so old it had turned to stone. Her phone rang at 9 that night. Dr. Terstock. Anine's voice was steady and careful. The fragments are confirmed human, Elaine. Preliminary dating puts them at approximately 60 years. I've notified the county sheriff's office. This is now an open investigation. Elaine sat at her father's kitchen table. Above her, his service medal gleamed in its shadow box. Beside her, Kip lay on the floor with his chin on her foot, eyes open, watching the dark hallway as if he expected something to come down it. Her father had built this house. Her father had planted the pecan trees. Her father had let a termite mound grow for decades over the bones of a man named Henry Lyle Cotter, and the only living creature on Earth that had known it was a dog nobody believed. The town pulled away from Elaine like a tide going out quietly. Without announcement, just gone. On the 5th morning after the demolition, she drove to the general store for milk and batteries. The woman behind the register, Martha, who had hugged Elaine the first week and said, "Welcome home, sweetheart," rang her up without a word. Eyes on the counter, hands moving fast. When Elaine said thank you, Martha nodded at the receipt and called for the next customer. There was no next customer. Elaine sat in her truck in the parking lot for a long time. The engine ticked as it cooled. A wasp crawled across the windshield. That afternoon, a letter arrived in the mailbox, typed on the stationery of a law firm in Bainbridge. It was addressed to her, but the language was aimed at someone else, someone official, someone watching. The letter stated that the historical disturbance on the Mwangi property may constitute a violation of county preservation ordinances, and that the Church Board of First Unity Baptist had retained counsel to explore appropriate remedies. The church board. Raymond's church. She read it twice at the kitchen table. Then she set it down and looked at her father's service medal on the wall. The shadow box glass caught the afternoon light and threw a small, bright square onto the ceiling. Maybe Raymond was right. Maybe she was chasing something that wasn't there. A letter could mean anything. A bullet casing in Georgia clay that was hardly unusual. And the bones. Dr. Anene had said approximately 60 years, but approximately was not exactly. Could be older. Could be something else entirely. Maybe the stroke had taken more than her arm. She had heard the whispers at the post office 2 days earlier. She didn't need to hear them again to know what the town was saying. Raymond had planted the seed with care. Grief does strange things. The stroke affected her cognition. That dog the military threw away. She's treating it like a detective. The VFW had canceled her welcome reception. She found out from a voicemail. The commander's voice was polite and stiff, the way people sound when they're reading from a script someone else wrote. Kip was the only thing in the house that hadn't changed. He worked the property in the same methodical loops, nose to the ground, ears pivoting. Each evening he brought her something. A corroded brass button, green with age, dropped at her feet on the porch. A fragment of leather strap, stiff and cracked, placed on the kitchen floor beside his water bowl. Each object came from the soil near the old fence line, 30 yards from where the mound had stood. He carried them gently in his mouth, set them down, and looked at her with that fixed, patient intensity that said he had done his part. The rest was hers. She lined the objects on the kitchen windowsill: button, strap, a bent nail, a small piece of cloth so old it crumbled at the edges. She didn't know what they meant. She wasn't sure she wanted to. On the 5th night, she picked up the phone and called Nadia. It rang 4 times, 5. Elaine almost hung up. Then the line clicked. Mom. Not warm, not cold, just flat, like a door held open exactly wide enough to look through. I need to talk to you, Elaine said. Raymond called me, Nadia said. He's worried about you. David too. They both said you're not doing well. Raymond doesn't know me. And whose fault is that? The words came fast, automatic, like a reflex Nadia had practiced for years. Then a pause, a breath. Sorry. What do you need? Elaine told her. The mound, the dog, the letter in her father's handwriting, the bullet casing, the bones the coroner's team had pulled from the clay. She spoke slowly, choosing each word, keeping her voice level the way she had learned in 26 years of delivering reports to people who outranked her. Nadia listened without interrupting. That was her training, too, a different kind, but the same discipline. Mom, it sounds like you've been through a lot out there alone. Maybe you should come to Atlanta for a while. Let the county handle whatever they... The letter mentions a man named Henry Lyle Cotter, Elaine said. He owned this land before your grandfather. The county says he left, but there's no forwarding address, no sale price, no record of him after 1963. Silence on the line, not the polite silence of someone waiting to redirect, a different silence. The kind Elaine recognized from her own career, the silence of someone whose attention had just shifted from personal to professional. Spell the last name, Nadia said. Elaine spelled it. I'll look into it. I'm not promising anything. I know. The call ended. Elaine set the phone on the table and pressed her left palm flat against the wood. Kip was lying in the hallway, chin on the floor, watching her. Between his front paws sat a new offering, a small, tarnished metal disc he had dug from the fence line that afternoon. She hadn't picked it up yet. Outside, the crickets pulsed in the dark. The kitchen clock ticked. She sat and waited and tried not to think about what it meant that a dog no one trusted was the only one still searching. The phone rang at 11. Elaine reached for it so fast she knocked her water glass off the table. I found something, Nadia said. Her voice had changed. The flatness was gone. In its place was something tight, controlled, the voice of a reporter holding a live wire. A newspaper clipping from 1964, the Bainbridge Post Searchlight. Henry Lyle Cotter's wife filed a missing persons report 8 months after he supposedly left town. The case was opened and closed in 6 days. Elaine's mouth went dry. The investigating officer was the county sheriff, a man named Virgil Stroud. Nadia paused. Mom, I've read every article Raymond's Historical Society has ever published about Decatur County's black land ownership movement, dozens of names. Every sheriff, every clerk, every county official from that era gets mentioned somewhere. But Virgil Stroud doesn't appear once, not once. It's like someone erased him on purpose. Nadia's silver hatchback pulled up the dirt lane at 10 the next morning. Elaine watched from the porch as her daughter stepped out, sunglasses pushed up on her head, a leather bag slung over one shoulder. She was 34, tall, like her grandfather. She moved with the quick, purposeful stride of someone who had come to solve a problem and leave. She didn't hug Elaine. She climbed the porch steps and looked at the property the way a reporter surveys a scene, scanning, cataloging, already forming a lead. I came to see for myself, Nadia said, and then we're going to talk about Atlanta. Elaine nodded. She had expected this. They walked the property. Elaine showed her the debris field first, the shattered remains of the column still spread across the red clay behind the silo. She pointed to the spot where Kip had first alerted, the second spot where he had dug up the casing, the fence line where he had been pulling objects from the soil for days. Kip was already there. He had trotted ahead of them the moment they left the porch. Now he stood at the edge of the debris pile with his weight forward, ears locked, nose aimed at the rubble. As Nadia approached, he dropped into his sit, the same posture, the same rigid, trembling focus. His eyes never left the ground. Nadia stopped walking. He does this every time, she said. Every time someone gets close to that pile. Nadia crouched down, 5 feet from the dog. She studied him for a long time. Kip didn't acknowledge her. His breathing was fast, rhythmic, mechanical, the same pattern he had used the day the mound came down. His shoulders vibrated with a tension so fine it looked like a current running under the skin. A dove called from the tree line. The morning air smelled like warm clay and pine sap. That's not a confused dog, Nadia said quietly. That's a trained response. Inside the house, Elaine laid everything on the kitchen table, the letter in its Ziploc bag, the rusted .38 casing. Dr. Aneen's preliminary report: bone fragments. Human, approximately 60 years old. The objects Kip had brought in from the fence line, still arranged on the windowsill. Button, strap, nail cloth. Nadia read the letter 3 times. She photographed everything with her phone. She asked questions the way she had been trained to ask them: short, specific, building toward something. You said the land records show no sale price. None. And Cotter's status is listed as departed, no forwarding. Correct. And this Raymond, he told you Cotter was a drifter who moved on. His exact words. Nadia set the letter down. For the first time since arriving, she looked at Elaine not as a problem to manage, but as a source. Why didn't you call me sooner? Elaine's left hand rested on the table. Her right hung at her side. She could have said 100 things. She said the truest one. I didn't think you'd come. They sat with that for a moment. The kitchen clock ticked. Kip padded in from the hallway and lay down between their chairs, his chin on the floor, eyes moving from one woman to the other. Nadia spent the rest of the day working. She sat cross-legged on the living room floor with her laptop and her phone, pulling county records, calling contacts at the state archives, cross-referencing the missing persons report from 1964. Elaine brought her coffee twice and said nothing. She knew what focus looked like. She had worn that same expression for 26 years. By evening, Nadia had found the thread, Sheriff Virgil Stroud. The man who closed the Cotter case in 6 days had signed off on 11 land transfers in Decatur County between 1960 and 1968. All of them involved black families acquiring property from white owners. All of them were celebrated in Raymond's Historical Society pamphlets as milestones of progress. None of them listed sale prices. Stroud facilitated every one of these transfers, Nadia said, and Raymond built an entire narrative around them. But Stroud's name never appears in any of Raymond's publications, not once. She looked up from the laptop. Someone very carefully made sure the sheriff who made all this possible and who shut down the one investigation that could have unraveled it stayed invisible. The porch boards creaked at 8 o'clock that night. Elaine opened the front door and found Raymond standing under the yellow bulb, hands at his sides. No casserole this time, no sweet tea. His face was set in a way she hadn't seen before, harder, older, stripped of warmth. I hear your daughter is here, he said. She is. Then I need you to hear me clearly, Elaine. He stepped closer. The yellow light carved deep lines around his mouth. Your father was a great man, not a perfect man. No man is. But what he built here, what he meant to this community, that's bigger than one name on one old letter. There are bones in that field, Raymond. And there are families in this county whose homes sit on deeds from that same era. 40 families, maybe more. You pull on this thread, you don't just unravel Joseph, you unravel all of them. Every title, every mortgage, every inheritance. His voice was steady, but his hands were not. His right thumb pressed hard against his left palm, working the skin. I'm not protecting a secret, Elaine. I'm protecting a community. Your father understood that. I'm asking you to understand it too. He left without waiting for an answer. His taillights disappeared down the dirt lane. The night air settled thick and warm. Somewhere in the dark, a whippoorwill called. Elaine stood on the porch, her left hand gripping the railing. He was right. She knew he was right. 40 families, mortgages, schools. Children who had never known anything but the homes their grandparents had built on that land. One truth could crack all of it. Behind her, from the back of the house, a sound broke through the stillness. Not a bark, not a whine. A sharp, rapid scratching claws on wood, followed by a single high-pitched yelp. Nadia appeared in the hallway. Mom, it's the dog. They found Kip at the back door, pawing at the screen, his entire body shaking. His nose was pressed against the mesh, aimed across the dark yard at the old tool shed, the small wooden structure beside the silo that Raymond had told Elaine not to touch. Joseph's sacred space, he had called it. Just old tools and memories. Leave it be. Kip's ears were pinned so far forward they nearly touched. His breathing came in short, explosive bursts. He clawed at the screen again, leaving long white scratches in the mesh, and let out a sound Elaine had never heard from him, a low, pressurized moan that rose from his chest and vibrated the doorframe. Nadia looked at her mother across the dark hallway. Neither of them spoke. They didn't need to. The dog had found something else, and it was inside the one place they'd been told never to open. Elaine pulled the padlock. It was old and brittle, and it broke on the second strike of the hammer she held in her left hand. The tool shed door swung inward on rusted hinges, releasing a breath of trapped air that smelled like motor oil, dry rot, and something deeper, something mineral and cold, like the inside of a well. The shed was small, 8 feet by 10, no windows. A single bare bulb hung from the ceiling, and when Nadia pulled the chain, it flickered once and held. Yellow light filled the space, catching dust motes that swirled in the draft from the open door. Shelves lined the walls, old coffee cans full of nails, a handsaw with a wooden handle, jars of screws sorted by size. Joseph Mwangi's tools, arranged with the same care he had given everything. A workbench ran along the back wall, its surface scarred with decades of use. Kip entered before either of them. He moved through the doorway low and fast, nose sweeping the dirt floor in wide arcs. His breathing shifted the rapid mechanical bursts that Elaine had learned to recognize as his working pattern. He circled the room once, twice. On the third pass, he stopped at the base of the workbench and dropped into his sit, rigid, locked-out nose aimed at the ground between his front paws. Nadia stood in the doorway and watched. She had seen this posture once before at the debris pile that afternoon. But here, in this cramped space under the bare bulb, it was different. The dog's intensity filled the room. His shoulders trembled. A thin whine rose from his throat like a wire being drawn tight. "Same spot?" Nadia whispered. "Same behavior," Elaine said. "Every time. He doesn't guess. He doesn't wander. He goes exactly where he needs to go." The night air pressed warm against their backs. A moth tapped at the bare bulb overhead. They pulled the workbench away from the wall. Underneath, the dirt floor looked the same as the rest-packed red clay, hard and dry. But Kip's nose stayed locked on a spot 18 inches from the wall. Elaine knelt and began to scrape with the garden trowel. Nadia knelt beside her and dug with her hands. 6 inches down, the trowel hit metal. It took them 20 minutes to clear the dirt away. What they uncovered was a military issue. Ammunition box, olive drab, steel, sealed with a rubber gasket. Identical in style to the boxes Elaine had seen in every armory she had ever inspected. Identical to the kind her father would have known from Korea. Elaine brushed the last of the clay from the lid. Her left hand was steady. She unlatched the clasps and opened it. 3 items inside. Each one wrapped in wax paper that crackled when she touched it. The first was a single sheet of legal paper, typed with a notary stamp at the bottom. It was a will. Henry Lyle Cotter's will, dated March 1962. It named one beneficiary, Joseph Mwangi, described as "my farmhand and trusted friend," and left him the property in its entirety. The language was simple and clear. The notary stamp was from a county office in Bainbridge. The second was another document, a deed of sale, transferring the same property from Cotter to Mwangi. But this one was handwritten, not typed. The date was different. The handwriting was different, and the sale price line was left blank. A forged deed, a manufactured transaction to replace the real one. The third was a photograph. 2 men standing in front of the farmhouse, arms at their sides, squinting into the sun. One white, one black, both in work clothes, both smiling. On the back, in pencil, someone had written, "For my brother Joe, this land is yours, earned and deserved. HLC W962. Elaine held the photograph under the bare bulb. Her father's face, young and bright, standing next to a man who had wanted to give him everything. A man who didn't need to be killed for the land to change hands. A man whose will would have been enough. Kip released his posture. He lay down on the dirt floor beside the open box and rested his chin on his paws. His eyes stayed open, watching Elaine, but the trembling had stopped. The whine was gone. Whatever he had needed her to find, she had found it. Nadia sat back on her heels. She read the will twice, then the forged deed. She held them side by side. "Someone killed him for nothing," she said. The will was legal. The land was already his. "Not his," Elaine whispered. "My father's." They carried the box into the kitchen. Elaine set it on the table under the light and called Dr. Anine. The coroner answered on the second ring. It was nearly midnight, but her voice was alert. "The full forensic report came in this evening," Dr. Anine said. "I was going to call you in the morning. The bone fragments show clear signs of blunt force trauma to the skull. This was not a natural death, Elaine." Elaine closed her eyes. "I found something else. A will. Henry Cotter left this property to my father willingly. Someone forged a deed to cover it up." A long pause. Bring everything to my office tomorrow, first thing. The call ended. Elaine sat at the table with the will and the photograph and the forged deed spread before her. Then she picked up the phone again and dialed Raymond's number. He answered on the fourth ring. His voice was rough with sleep. Elaine read him the will, word by word. She read him the inscription on the photograph. She told him about the forged deed. She told him about the blunt force trauma. Silence on the line, not the careful silence of a man choosing his words, a different kind. The silence of something collapsing. Your father didn't kill anyone, Elaine. Raymond's voice was low and stripped bare. Nothing left of the pastor, nothing left of the mask. But he knew who did, and he spent his whole life paying for his silence. Elaine gripped the phone. Then who? Another silence, longer. She could hear him breathing. Come to the farm, Raymond. Tomorrow morning. Yes, he said, it's time. I should have told you the day you arrived. I should have told you before your father died. His voice cracked on the last word. I'll be there at dawn, and I'll tell you everything who killed Henry Cotter and why I've spent 50 years carrying a dead man's secret. Raymond's truck came up the dirt lane before the sun cleared the tree line. The headlights cut through a low fog that hung over the fields like gauze. He parked beside Nadia's hatchback and sat behind the wheel for a long time before opening the door. Elaine and Nadia were on the porch. 2 mugs of coffee on the railing, untouched. The air was cool for the first time since Elaine had arrived, a hint of real autumn riding the dawn breeze, carrying the smell of wet grass and pine. Kip lay at Elaine's feet, not in his working posture, not alert, not scanning. He was stretched on his side with his head resting against her left ankle, his ribs rising and falling in a slow, even rhythm. His ears were soft. His eyes were half closed. In 9 days on this property, it was the first time the dog had been still. Raymond climbed the porch steps like a man carrying something heavy across his shoulders. He looked 10 years older than the last time Elaine had seen him. The pastoral confidence was gone. What remained was a 70-year-old man who hadn't slept, whose hands hung loose at his sides, whose eyes were red-rimmed and dry. He didn't sit down. He stood at the railing and looked out at the field where the column had stood. His name was Virgil Stroud, Raymond said. White landowner, owned 300 acres east of here. He was on the county planning board. He knew every deed, every transfer, every piece of property that changed hands in this part of Georgia. A cardinal sang from the fence post. The fog thinned as the light strengthened. Henry Cotter wrote that will in good faith. He wanted Joseph to have this land. They'd worked side by side for 4 years. Cotter had no children. His wife had left him, by then moved back to her family in Alabama. So he went to a notary in Bainbridge and made it legal. Raymond's voice was steady but flat, emptied of the music that had always carried it. Stroud found out. I don't know how. Maybe the notary talked. Maybe Cotter told someone. But Stroud found out that a white man was willing property to a black man, freely, as a gift. And that was something Virgil Stroud could not allow. Why? Nadia said. She had her phone on the railing beside her coffee, recording. Because it set a precedent. If a white man could will land to a black man, not sell it, not trade it, but give it, then the entire structure Stroud had built his power on meant nothing. He controlled those land transfers. He decided who got what and for how much. A gift between equals cut him out entirely. Raymond turned from the railing. He looked at Elaine. Stroud killed Henry Cotter in November of 1963. Beat him to death and buried him in the low ground behind the silo. Then he forged a deed of sale, backdated, no price listed, and filed it with the county. Made it look like a transaction instead of a bequest. Made it look like business instead of brotherhood. The sun broke the tree line. Golden light spilled across the porch boards and touched Kip's fur. The dog didn't stir. And my father? Elaine said. The words came out quiet, almost without air behind them. Your father found out what Stroud had done. I don't know when exactly. Weeks later, maybe months. By then, he was already living in this house, already building his life on this land. Raymond's hands closed on the railing. Stroud came to him and laid it out plain. If Joseph went to the sheriff, who was Stroud's man anyway, the will would surface, the wife would contest it, and Joseph would lose everything. And if that wasn't enough, Stroud told him he'd end up in the same ground as Cotter. So he stayed quiet, Nadia said. He stayed quiet, for 60 years. Raymond's voice cracked for the first time. He kept that ammunition box in the tool shed. The will, the photograph, the forged deed. I think he kept it because he couldn't bring himself to destroy the proof of what Henry had done for him, the real document, the gift. But he couldn't use it either. A breeze moved through the yard. The pecan trees rustled. Somewhere down the lane, a rooster crowed. He told me on his deathbed, Raymond said. 18 months ago, in the hospital in Bainbridge, he grabbed my hand and told me everything. And then he asked me to keep it buried. And you did, Elaine said. I did. Raymond lowered his head. Because I went home that night and I pulled every land record from that era, every transfer Stroud touched. 41 families, Elaine. 41 black families whose property traces back to deeds that Stroud brokered, Stroud filed, Stroud controlled. If one deed is forged, they all come into question. Every title, every mortgage, every home. He looked at her with nothing left to hide behind. I wasn't protecting your father's reputation. I was protecting the ground under people's feet, the only ground some of them have ever had. Elaine sat with this. The coffee cooled on the railing. Kip's warmth pressed against her ankle, solid, constant, the weight of something that had finally come to rest. She looked down at the dog. His nose twitched once in his sleep. A small, involuntary pulse. The ghost of a reflex that had driven him across every inch of this property, through every layer of buried truth, until there was nothing left to find. He had done his part. The rest was hers. So what do we do? Elaine whispered. Nadia picked up her phone from the railing. She turned off the recording and looked at her mother with an expression Elaine had never seen on her daughter's face before. Not anger, not distance, but the steady focus of a woman who had found her purpose inside someone else's pain. I can write this story, Nadia said. Not as a scandal, as a history. Cotter's story, Grandpa's story, the whole era. If we go public with the will, the real will, it doesn't threaten those families. It strengthens them. It proves the land was always meant to be theirs. The forged deeds go away. The real documents replace them. But it means everything comes out. Everything about Grandpa. Everything about Stroud. Everything Raymond kept hidden. She looked at Raymond. And everything about you. Raymond nodded once. He didn't argue. He didn't defend. He just stood in the morning light with his hands at his sides and waited. Elaine looked at Kip, then at her daughter. Two broken things she had never expected to find on this porch, a dog that wouldn't stop searching, and a child who had finally come home. Write it, Elaine said. Write all of it. 3 months later, on a morning in late December, Nadia's article went live. She had written it over 6 weeks, working from the kitchen table where her grandfather's service medal still hung on the wall above. She titled it, The Gift and the Grave, a 60-year silence in Decatur County. It ran in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution's long-form investigative section, 4,000 words, accompanied by photographs of the will, the forged deed, the inscription on the back of the photograph, and a single image of Kip sitting in the red clay debris field, ears forward, nose aimed at E ground. The piece did not call Joseph Mwangi a criminal. It did not call him a hero. It called him what he was, a man who received a gift of extraordinary generosity, who lost the giver to extraordinary violence, and who spent 60 years trapped between gratitude and guilt. It named Virgil Stroud as the killer. It named the system that made the killing possible and the silence necessary. It told the story of Henry Lyle Cotter, a sharecropper with no children and a failed marriage who found, in his black farmhand, the only family he had left, and who tried to give that family the only thing he owned. The county land title review began in January. It took 5 weeks. When it was finished, the result was the opposite of what Raymond had feared. Henry Cotter's will, the real will, notarized and dated, established a clear legal precedent of voluntary transfer. The forged deeds that Stroud had filed were struck from the record and replaced with corrected documents citing the historical evidence Nadia had uncovered. 41 families kept their land. Their titles were stronger than before. Raymond Osei stepped down as president of the Historical Society on a Sunday morning in early January. He announced it from the pulpit at First Unity Baptist, and he did not explain why. The congregation watched him walk down the center aisle and take a seat in the last pew. He still came to services every week. He still wore his good suit, but he sat in the back now, and he did not speak. On a cold Saturday in February, they buried Henry Lyle Cotter. Dr. Annanay had released the remains after the county investigation closed. Elaine chose the site herself, the flat ground behind the silo where the termite mound had stood, the same ground she had planned for her accessibility garden. A small group gathered in the winter light. Nadia stood beside her mother. Raymond stood at the back, hat in his hands. Dr. Neen came. A few neighbors came too, people who had read the article, people who had stopped waving at Elaine 3 months ago and now stood quietly in her yard with their heads bowed. A woman Elaine had never met drove up from Alabama. She was in her 40s, with Cotter's long jaw and pale eyes. His grandniece, the only living relative Nadia had been able to find. She stood at the edge of the small grave and pressed her hand against the simple wooden marker and did not speak for a long time. Then she turned to Elaine and put her arms around her. Elaine held her back with her one working arm and let the woman cry against her shoulder. They had never met. They had nothing in common except 2 men who had called each other brother 60 years ago on this same piece of ground. Kip sat beside the grave through the entire service. Quiet, still, his ears soft, his breathing slow. The VFW Hall added a second plaque the following week. It hung beside Joseph Mwangi's bronze plate, smaller but made of the same metal. It read, Henry Lyle Cotter, who gave what he had to the man he called brother. The commander who had canceled Elaine's welcome reception was the one who mounted it to the wall. David called on a Tuesday night in February. The conversation lasted 4 minutes. He asked about the farm. He asked about the dog. He did not ask about the article, but Elaine knew he had read it. Before he hung up, he said he might come down in the spring. He called again 2 weeks later. That one lasted 7 minutes. By March, the garden was finished. Elaine had built the raised beds herself, slowly, one-handed, over the course of weeks. Nadia helped on weekends when she drove down from Atlanta, which she did more often now. The beds sat in neat rows over the ground where the column had stood for decades. Elaine planted collard greens, tomatoes, sweet peppers, and a row of marigolds along the border because her father had always grown marigolds. And some things deserved to be carried forward, even when the man who started them was imperfect. On the first warm afternoon in March, Elaine sat in a low chair at the edge of the garden with a glass of water in her left hand. The sun was golden and full. The smell of turned earth and new growth drifted across the yard. A mockingbird sang from the fence post, the same post where Kip had dug up the first brass button 2 months and a lifetime ago. Kip lay beside her chair, not at her feet this time, but pressed along her left side, his spine against her calf, his head resting on his outstretched paws. His eyes were closed. His breathing was deep and even. The trembling was gone. The pacing was gone. The relentless, maddening drive that had carried him across every inch of this property through debris and dirt and 60 years of buried silence had finally come to rest. Elaine set down her water and placed her left hand on his ribs. She could feel his heartbeat, steady and slow, pushing against her palm. The garden grew over the ground where the secret had been kept. The soil that had held a dead man's bones now held roots and seeds and the quiet beginning of something new. It was not a perfect garden. The rows were uneven, the beds were rough, but it was built by a woman who had chosen the truth over the legend, and that made it sacred. Honor is not inherited. It is chosen. And sometimes the bravest thing a soldier can do is dismantle the flag they saluted their whole life, because the truth matters more than the legend. Kip's nose twitched in his sleep. Even at rest, he was still searching.